Well, I want to get to the bottom of this with somebody who knows what's going on. He's Executive Director of Consumer Research, Will Hild. Welcome back.
Great to be with you again.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. And I want to get into this with you because I think it's, par for the course, right? We're in a trade war, and if we've got something that they want and they've got something we want, then we're going to work hard to make sure the other doesn't get it until the negotiations are complete. But what type of impact do you think this is going to have? And I don't mean short term, like, production may stop and things may not be available and prices may go up, but long-term impact, is this something we won't be able to source ever again in the United States?
No, I don't believe that's the case. The thing is that these rare earth metals are actually found across the entire globe. They're really not that rare. It's actually kind of a cliche joke about rare earths. Is the thing about them is they're not that rare. What's rare, the leverage point that China has, is that because of prohibitive environmental controls here in the United States, and the fact that we've pushed so much of our industrial strength overseas, there is no refining of these metals here in the United States. China has cornered the market in the refining of these metals. And so we're going to have to long-term bring that back home to either here in the United States or at least a partner like Mexico or Canada who we have access to geographically and is, closer to us, geopolitically than obviously China, our newly minted frenemy, has become. So this is a long-term solvable problem. Absolutely, it is the consequence of a number of different policy failures from past administrations, but also Wall Street, which was all too happy to source the lowest cost place to put all this stuff. But as we're seeing, the price of something and the cost can be two different things. And it may have been low prices, but it was very high cost because we're now in a tough position.
Now, this is, to me, a pretty commonsensical thing. But we went through this when COVID happened. And it was not because of a trade war as much as it was people were dead and people were sick and people were quarantined. And we didn't have access to things. Cars took forever to get. There were chip shortages all over the place and medication shortages. What do you think is the biggest barrier that's in the way of us acting on the lesson that we should have learned way back when?
Well, that's a great question, and I would say it's probably a tie between the environmental protections that I think are so excessive. You can't have environmental protections that are so excessive that you can't have an industrialized nation, right? I can tell you, it doesn't matter how nice the environment is. If we're all living in trees, it's not going to go well. So we have to be able to do basic things. And to tell you the truth, we have our industry here in the United States is the most environmentally friendly production in the entire globe. China pollutes way more than anything in the United States, either that exists or could exist, because we are just so much better and so much more careful in our manufacturing and our refining.
And we follow the rules that we make.
Big obstacle. Exactly, all the rules that we make. So we're going to have to bring that home. The other problem we haven't talked about yet is during that COVID period, in that time when we should have been learning all these lessons, you had Wall Street asset managers like BlackRock and Larry Fink that I've talked about many times on this show, but others like State Street and Vanguard that were pushing down corporate America's throat these ESG standards. And ESG stands for environmental social governance. They're billed by the supporters as an investment strategy, but really what it is a far left progressive agenda being pushed not through the ballot box, but through Wall Street. And the net of it is, the short version is, that is another reason why a lot of these companies that saw this coming, that said, hey, look, oh my gosh, COVID has shown us that these supposedly robust, invincible supply chains could disappear tomorrow if something were to go wrong. Let's bring that here. Well, the ESG pushers like BlackRock would punish those companies for doing that. They punish their executives. They threaten their board members. In fact, in the case of Exxon, they replaced 3 of them because they weren't doing Larry Fink's bidding, the CEO of BlackRock. So that's another thing that needs to be removed. I'm glad to say that since the election, a lot of the banks and the asset managers that were pushing that stuff have started to ease off. but it's still not over yet, and we need to keep pushing on Wall Street. I hope that the Trump administration will not only clear the bureaucratic hurdles that come from the government, but they will also clear these Wall Street hurdles. None of this, what BlackRock was doing, is legal, and they need to be made to answer for that, and it needs to be clear that that is never going to happen again.
And well, what's funny here to me is that China championed this whole net zero initiative along with BlackRock coming on later on as like a U.S. partner, and voila, China bails out, BlackRock bails out. Nobody's part of the net zero initiative anymore. It just smacks of so much hypocrisy.
That's exactly right. And it was always a really cynical play on China's part, because what they really wanted is for the United States to unilaterally deindustrialize while China's emissions skyrocketed, which is what happened. Right. What happened. Ours plateaued, started to decline. UK, another country that's monomaniacally fixated on hitting net zero, they're like 3% of emissions. We're like 10 or 15. I have to go look it up. China has gone from being almost nothing to nearly the majority of the world's emissions, and they're skyrocketing. They have absolutely no plans to stop. They're building 100 coal plants a year. So the idea that we need to hit net zero while China skyrockets in emissions, it's absurd, and it is always a cynical play by them. That President Trump called the China hoax. That's what he meant by that, is that this was always a cynical play to get us to fight with one arm tied behind our back economically. And so we just need to scrap the whole thing. It's based on ridiculous, faulty science. As we've seen time and time again, experts have lied to us to feather their own nest. This is another example of that, but they've been in bed with China. BlackRock, our first campaign against BlackRock was actually BlackRock Loves China, because they've been in bed together so long.
I love it. Folks, we're on with Will Hild. He is the Executive Director of Consumer Research. Check out consumerresearch.org. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what couldn't be done. They said, no way you're going to make Japanese cars in the United States. Well, Honda's now committed to making 90% of their cars in the U.S., and they're shutting down or moving their operations from Mexico and Canada right into the U.S. of A. We're coming right back with Will Hild from Consumers Research. Don't go anywhere.
This is all based on a report out of Japan. A newspaper there is saying that Honda is considering shifting 90% of production to serve the U.S. market to the United States in response to auto tariffs. This is, of course, creating a lot of anxiety here in Ontario. Honda's plants in Alliston, just outside of Barrie, they employ 4,200 people. This morning, the Premier says that he spoke with the head of Honda Canada, who shared that the reports are not accurate. But Doug Ford didn't say exactly what's next for the automaker. He's leaving it to the company to clarify that.
We're going to keep Honda here, and I'll do everything I can to protect the people and their jobs. And that's what this throne speech is all about today, is making sure that we protect people's jobs, protect communities and businesses right across the province. We have to streamline processes to make sure we're more competitive around the world, attract new companies here. And that's exactly what our throne speech is, and the mandate the people gave me after the election.
I'm Siobhan Morris.
That is the report from Canada's CTV. And I just have to point out, that Doug Ford, that's the same Doug Ford that was beating on his chest saying, I will shut the lights off in the U.S. We're going to make it painful for the Americans. Right? It was like watching WWE. And I was waiting for Hulk Hogan to come in and rip his shirt off and wave the American flag. This Doug Ford, he's something else. He's pretty funny, in my opinion. I want to bring in Will Hild. He's Executive Director of Consumers Research, consumersresearch.org. Will, what do you think is the play here? Is this a squeeze play on Canada? I think they're just squeezing Canada out. And as much as they want to have their people building Japanese cars that come to the U.S., that game seems to be over per Trump's tariff strategy. Your thoughts?
Yes, I would say so. And I'll just note really quickly, people may recall that it was actually Ford's brother who used to have his position before he died of cancer. And, he was infamous. He got caught smoking crack on video many times. And it would appear Canada, that region has somehow downgraded. They've gotten the worse Ford brother now, because at least that guy wasn't destroying industry in Canada with arrogance and, like you said, chest thumping. Canada has been, in some ways, twice or three times as suicidal to its own industry as America has. I talked in the last segment about the things that we've done to make it very difficult to produce things like, refined rare earth minerals here in the United States. Well, right. Canada is that on steroids. Even the NetZero stuff, they were threatening to pass a NetZero tax that would have been an absolute nuke to basically all of their production in that country. I think even Mark Carney has walked that back now in the middle of all this tariff stuff. They realize that they can't afford that kind of nonsense. But absolutely, I think Canada is in a real tough position here because they sort of, racing, they call it, drifting off of somebody where you stay behind them and you don't have to deal with the same wind forces that they do. Well, Canada has basically drifted off us economically. And I think that is what Trump is talking about when he talks about, them having an unfair trade deal with us is they don't have to pay for their military, because they're protected by us. They don't have to, attract industry in the same way. But people, because they're close.
And they're trying to build cars that they're not selling to Canadians. They're selling them to us.
Exactly. They're selling them to us. So I think that's really what Trump's tariff war with Canada is about, is saying, listen, you're not going to draft off us anymore. You're actually going to have to pay your own way on these things and pay us for the privilege of protecting you with the world's largest military and pay us for the privilege of access to our markets, which is why anyone wants to build anything in your country anyway. So I think this is probably going to be par for the course for both Canada and Mexico for the foreseeable future.
Now, how do we, and this is a little bit outside of your, your expertise as a consumer research guy, but from a political perspective, and I know you have thoughts on this stuff, it seems like that's part of this that we have to manage as well to make sure we don't create enemies of our neighbors. That, we kind of have to make sure, as my friends in the mob would say, wet their beaks. If they don't wet their beaks, they're going to get really thirsty.
Yeah, that's a great question, and obviously that is the big question mark standing over Trump's tariff policy. We basically did away with tariffs in the earliest 20th century. They had, as Trump likes to always bring up, they had typified our tax and industrial policy basically from the beginning of the nation, and then we put them away basically for geopolitical reasons, both in World War I and World War II. And so the question is, if we bring them back, do we have similar prosperity that we had back when we used them? And I think that's a real question. And I think it does come down to how we navigate this stuff. I think you raise a good point. We don't want to make the tariffs so high that, Canada comes to resent us and doesn't even want to be near us anymore. Not that they can move, but obviously
right.
there's a lot of things
they can open their arms to China.
Well, that is the big concern. I think that's a great point, which is we're going to have to watch for that. In some ways, part of the concern is they already have. Right. Canada has been moving very close to China. I think that's one of the things that the administration is very frustrated with. Is it's one thing to say to draft off us economically, benefit from access to our markets and the proximity to us, and not having to pay for military, and just say, hey, look, it's good to be the little brother, right? You don't have to do the work the same way the United States does. It's another thing to go cozy up to our enemy at the same time that you're benefiting from all these things. And so I think a lot of the consternation and frustration with Canada is well earned. And even the fact that they appointed Mark Carney, not to get too in the weeds here, but I do think your listeners appreciate sort of the negative serendipity of this. Mark Carney's last job was running the NetZero Alliance, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for NetZero. That thing you talked about, BlackRock and all the banks leaving, that's what he was in charge of. So they have appointed a lunatic. I mean, I thought Justin Trudeau was a lunatic. They have appointed an absolute madman to run their country, at least until the next election. And the polling looks like they might pick him again. So I can understand why the administration would not view them as the ally that Canada has normally been viewed as.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Will, excellent analysis. Thanks for shedding light on this. Tell everybody that's listening how they can learn more about the work that you guys are doing and what they can expect from you guys at consumersresearch.org.
Absolutely. Well, we are the point of the spear pushing back against BlackRock and ESG. The fight's not over. We've had a lot of victories, but we've got to finish the job so this stuff can't come back. So people can learn more at consumersresearch.org. That's consumersresearch.org. And they can follow our fight on Twitter if they'd like to follow me at Will Hild. That's WILLHILD on X, formerly known as Twitter.
Outstanding. Will Hild, Executive Director at Consumers Research. You heard the website, consumersresearch.org. He knows what he's talking about. He's got his finger on the pulse. I appreciate it, brother. You're a gentleman, a scholar, and a patriot. Thanks for being here, man.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet.